Today we're going to be going into more detail on strings and how they work in Python. Recall that a string is an ordered sequence or sequences of characters in which you can think of strings as words or sentences that consist of letters or characters that make up the words. For example, we have hello world as an example of a string. The word hello consists of the letters HELLO that make up the word, and the word world has the letters WORLD that make up the word world, and it represents the strings. So now that we know what a string is, we're going to be going on to making a program in which you prompt the user to type in text, and after the user types in their text, we're going to convert all the letters in that text to lowercase. So how this is going to work is that we prompt the user to type in text, which we've been doing in all these videos. We're declaring a variable here called n and saying that equal to n equals text input and text. So now that we prompt the user for input, we're gonna have to figure out how we can convert all the letters to lowercase in the string. And it turns out there's a method called lower in Python in which you can convert all the letters to lowercase in a string. And how this is gonna work is that we first print statement. In the print statement, we're gonna make use of the method, so we're not gonna use the quotation marks. So we're gonna print to the terminal the string name, which is the variable declared up here, in which you declared it to prompt the user to type in text and store it in this variable. And this base variable represents the string name, and we have dot in order to access the method. In this case, what I mentioned earlier, it was lower, and it's not just lower, we have to have lower open and close parentheses, and this is basically the notation for converting all the letters in the string to lowercase. We have the string name up here, which we declared up here to prompt the user for input, and then we have dot to gain access to this method of lower, and we have lower and then this open and close parentheses. We can think of these open and close parentheses to insert the value of n in between these, and whatever the method we use here is gonna use that effect to achieve what we want in this program. So for example, we have n here as hello world. This is just the easier way to think why we need this parentheses. So we have lower, and then we're inserting the value of n. For example, hello world. We have n dot lower hello world, and lower hello world. The lower outside these parentheses will convert all these letters to lowercase in the string. So now if you run hello, it's gonna convert. It's gonna be simply hello since I already typed hello in all lowercase. And now if I type out capital H and all the rest lowercase, it's gonna print out hello with the lowercase h, based on this method I use here to convert letters to lowercase in a string. And let's see if I type all uppercase hello, it's gonna convert that to lowercase hello. So now that we're able to achieve the effect of converting all the letters or characters in a string to lowercase, this time we'll be converting all the letters to uppercase instead. So this other method is called upper, which is basically like lower, except it's converting all the letters to uppercase. So here all we need to change is lower, and we're changing it from lower to upper, in which we're converting all the letters to uppercase. So we have on n, which is a string name, and then dot to access this method of upper in Python. And as I mentioned before, it makes it easier to memorize why you need these parentheses. You can insert this value into these parentheses, and this method is gonna achieve the effect of converting all the letters to uppercase. So now if we run this, and we have all lowercase hello, it's going to convert all of this to hello with the n dot upper and open and close parentheses with nothing between it. And we have hello with the capital H, and it's convert all of that to uppercase. We have all capital hello. It's going to say the same thing because I've already typed in all caps, and this is the method I'm using. So now that we're able to convert letters of a string to lowercase and uppercase, we're going to be moving on into making a more advanced program in which we're prompting a user to type in input, and then we're gonna count the number of letters, words, and sentences. So how this is gonna work is that we're gonna keep this prompt line of code right here, and we're gonna initialize three variables, in which we're gonna initialize three variables, which is count letters, count words, count sentences. We're gonna have count letters initialized as 0 in this case, because we need after we initialize it, we're gonna be iterating it throughout this program while checking if it's a lowercase or uppercase character, but we'll first initialize it so that we can start off at 0 for the number of letters, and then same thing we do for words, except we'll make it 1 except for 0, and we'll see why we're initializing it at 1 instead of 0 later on in this program. And lastly, we're gonna have count sentences, which we initialize at 0 in this case. So now that we have prompting the user for input for text to type, and with that we have initialized these 3 variables for the counting the number of letters, words, and sentences. Now we're going to be going on into calculating. Now we're going to be going on into iterating on each character in the string, which means going through each character in the string and checking whether certain conditions match. Then it's going to iterate, which means add 1 each time to the number of count. So how this is going to work is that we need to iterate through each character in the string, and how this is going to work is, recall we have a for loop in which you can iterate something a certain amount of times. And recall how for loops work. We have for I, which is a random variable, and we have for I in range of n. And how this is working is that we have for loop for this random variable here. In this range of n, I is going to be repeated n times. That's what this for loop means. It's going to repeat this random variable in this range of n. But in this case, we're trying to iterate through each character in the string. So how we're going to iterate through each character in a string in Python is we're going to have for I, we're going to keep this for I in, but except the range of n, we're going to have for I in n. And how this works is that we still have the for loop going on with this random variable, and in n, and n represents this string variable that we declared up here to prompt the user. So for I in n represents iterating, for example, we have this hello, it's going to check this h, and run a certain command, and it's going to check this E next and run a certain command, and L, and so on until it reaches the end of the string. So now that we have the idea of iterating through each character in the string, now we have to do actual calculations in order to determine the amount of letters, words, and sentences. So how can we do this? Well, we need to make use of conditions in this case. And recall that a letter can either be lowercase or uppercase. So now that we made use of the lowercase and uppercase methods, now we can put that to use in order to find out whether a character is a letter or not. And in this case, in order to determine whether a character is a letter or not, and it should iterate it each time, we're gonna set that. We're gonna check: is it lower or is it upper? Then it's gonna iterate the count. So in order to go through this program, we're going to have this condition called if. And recall, we simply have if in Python, which is a condition. And in this case, how we're going to notate this in order to check if this character is lowercase or uppercase, it's similar to the lowercase and uppercase program. We're going to have this character instead of the string, and we have the dot to gain access to a method of Python. And in this case, we did lower last time in this program, but in this case, we have to do is lower instead of just lower, because we're trying to check if this certain character is lower, which means is lower, then it's gonna run a certain command. I dot lower will just convert that to lower, but is lower will check is it lower or not. And if it is lower, then we can just run that certain command. In this case, we can iterate the number of letters by 1, which means add it by 1 each time we find that a character is a lower, or a letter is lowercase or uppercase. So now that we have is lower, we need to also include is upper, because letters can be lowercase or uppercase. So in this case, we have I dot. Similar to this, we're gonna have is upper, which are these 2 methods I introduced in the last 2 programs. It was lower, open and close parentheses, and an upper and open and close parentheses. So now that we're able to find out how we're able to check whether a character is a letter or not, uh, now that we're able to figure that out, we have to find out how we can add this value each time. And how this works is that uh, we can iterate the count of this variable, which means every time this condition is true, it's going to add it each time to this variable. It's going to keep on adding 1 until it reaches the end of the string, in which we have this for loop. So how this is going to work is that so now that we have this condition is checking that if it's lower or uppercase, we can iterate the count of letters plus equals 1, and that's how the notation works. We have plus equals 1, meaning that it will add 1 each time this condition is true. So if this character is lower or uppercase, you have to keep on adding 1 to this variable in which we initialize it up here. So plus equals 1 can also be represented as equals count letters plus 1. And that's basically the same thing as plus equals 1, in which you're saying count letters equals count letters plus 1. And this basically means that we're setting count letters equal to count letters plus 1 each time this condition is true in this loop until we reach the end of the string. And it's basically a longer way, but it makes it more readable. Uh, Plus equals is a shorter way of saying count letters equals count letters plus 1, but in this case we'll say plus equals 1, and it equals count letters plus count letters equals count letters plus 1, and it should iterate the count each time. So now that we figured out how we can iterate the count of count letters, it'll make it easier for finding the number of words and sentences. So in this case, uh, we initialize count words to 1 because in order to find the number of words in the text, we can find the number of spaces in the text and add 1 to that. So that means, for example, we have hello world, and the number of spaces is 1 since there's a space between hello and world. And if we add 1 to that one space, then it'll be 2, which means there are 2 words, and hello world indeed is 2 words. And another example is hello world, which means you have 3 words in this case. And we can see there's 2 spaces, the space between the first hello and the second hello, and the space between the hello and then the world, which means 2 plus 1, and it gets 3 in the end, which is 3 words. So there's 2 spaces and then 3 words in the end. And this notation is going to be similar, but we're going to check for spaces. So we're going to have I, which is the character here, and check, is it a space or not? And we have the same notation as is lower and is upper. We have is, and then instead of lower or upper, it's space, checking for spaces. And if it's a space, then it's going to iterate the words by 1. Now, the reason why we set it as 1, because if we set it at 0, the number of words, then the number of words would be a number of spaces, and that's not true because hello world has only 1 space, but there isn't 1 word, there's 2 words. So that's why we need to initialize at 1, because the number of words, in this case, we can think of it as the number of words is 1 plus the number of spaces in the text, which is why we initialize that at 1. But the same idea is here. We're trying to iterate the count each time by 1, every time we're checking for a space, in this case. And lastly, we're checking for, we're counting the number of sentences. So in this case, we can count the number of punctuation, which helps us determine the number of sentences. So in this case, we're not going to be using is punct, but rather we're going to be using I equals equals period. And how this is going to work is that we have this character up here, and we're saying equals equals. And recall, we need to use equals equals to compare 2 numerical values. We use only one equation sign to describe how on the right side, whatever is on the right side is going to be assigned on this left side. But in this case, we're trying to compare 2 values. We're trying to compare this I with the period and checking, is there a period or not? And if there is a period, then it's gonna add 1 to the number of sentences each time. But we're not done yet, since we need to also add question mark and exclamation mark, since they're also counted as punctuation. So we have if I equals a period or I equals equals. So we do the same thing basically. We have I equals equals in quotation marks, the punctuation we have. So or I equals equals the question mark, or which is the last conditions left is the exclamation mark. So we have I equals equals exclamation mark. And once we are able to check if there's a period, question mark, or exclamation mark, we just got to iterate the count of the sentences by 1 each time, which is similar to the last two of words and letters. And yes, count sentences equals count sentences plus 1 is the same as whatever I wrote here. So every time this condition is true, it's going to keep on adding 1 to this count until it reaches the end of the string, which is why we have this for loop representing this whole block of code. So once you're able to figure out how, the number of letters, words, and sentences, now we just got to print out the result. And in this case, we're gonna make use concatenating strings. But in this case, the variables we have here are integers. Now recall how we can concatenate strings. We can't necessarily we can't concatenate strings to int unless we have a format string, in which I went over in the last video. So we have print number of letters in this case. Let's first print out the number of letters in quotation marks for all three of them. We have print number of words, and then we have lastly number of sentences. Now we can't just simply just do we can't just simply do plus the variable, because that's how we concatenate strings. You have the string in quotation marks and plus the variable up here. But if I type this, then it's going to bring up an error message. But let's test it out first. So we have count letters, count words, and count sentences. You're going to find out that's not going to work. So if we type out hello, it's going to give us an error message saying can only concatenate str, not integer. Now recall, one of the solutions to this, as I mentioned in the last video, was we can use a format string in which we have f outside of these quotation marks, and we can get rid of this concatenating strings, in which we have the format string, and we're able to concatenate strings to ints. So in this case, we have f, and in quotation marks, the number of letters equals, in curly braces, the variable here. Now that is a solution, but in this one, I'll be going over another solution called casting values. And what casting values mean is that we can convert one data type to another data type. So in this case, we can convert this integer variable to a string variable in this case. So we can cast the data type, which means we can change from one data type to another. And that allows us to concatenate strings to strings in this case, because we have the string here, but we have an integer variable up here. So we need to make sure that this is converted to a string in order to be able to concatenate these two. So we have number of letters plus, recall that's how you concatenate strings. You have quotation marks and then the text inside plus the variable name, but we can't just type count letters. So how are we concatenating, how we cast values is that we have the data type outside of the variable. We have the data type and parentheses, open and close parentheses, and between these parentheses is the variable that you want to insert. So here in this case, we have number of letters plus str, which means string, and then in parentheses count letters, which means count letters is an integer variable normally, but we're converting it to a string. That way we're able to convert this to a string, and that way we're able to concatenate strings to strings, as we cannot concatenate strings to integers. So now that we figured out this step, now it'll be easier to find out the next steps. So in this case, we're gonna have str count words, which is the same idea as this. We just need to cast a value, which means convert from one data type to another. In this case, converting from an integer to a string. And we're gonna have str, which is string, and then parentheses the variable. And the same thing we'll do with sentences. We have count sentences, and we're gonna print this out. And so basically, this is the program. So now if you type out hello world, then it's gonna print out the achieved result, except the sentences. But first, let's go over letters. Letters is 10. We can count through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which means this is correct. The number of letters is 10 in this text, and the number of words is 2, since there's 2 words. But here it says 0, because here, when you're trying to calculate sentences, we're trying to check for punctuation. And when I typed this text up, I didn't include any punctuation. So in the case of this program, I'm going to be typing hello world period, which means punctuation, in order to in order to achieve the specific rules of this program, in which you need to make sure to end each string with the period with the punctuation. And in this case, we have the number of letters is correct, which is 10 letters. We have 2 words, and the number of sentences is 1, because you have hello world and then the period at the end of the sentence. So now if you type, for example, hello world, and then hi world, for example, but with the exclamation mark, if we hit enter, we can have 17 letters. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is 10 letters. And then we have 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, which means 17 letters. And that means that there's 17 letters in this program. And then for the number of words, there's 4 words. We have hello world and then hi world. So which means there's 4 words. Number of sentences, there's 2 punctuation. There's this period, there's this exclamation mark. So this represents the end of each sentence, which means there's two sentences in total. And if I switch this exclamation with the question mark, the same result would be outputted. There'll be 17, 4, and 2. So now that we went over this program in which we're able to calculate the number of letters, words, and sentences, and being able to iterate through each character in the string, and checking uh, a specific condition of that character. Is it lower? Is it upper? Then it's gonna count as a letter, and we're gonna add one to each count every single time. As for words, we're gonna find the number of spaces, add one to the number of spaces, and that's the number of words. And for sentences, the number of punctuation is the number of sentences is basically the number of punctuation in the text. And we're also able to find another solution in being able to concatenate strings to integer. So based on this program, we're able to go into more details of strings and how we're able to learn some methods like lower methods, upper methods, and also space methods, and also is lower and is upper, which are a few of the methods I went over. So now that we went over strings in this video, we'll be going over making a multiple choice program in the next video.